It was a little bit of a different experience. Going into it, I had an idea of it was going to be it's totally competitive. It goes from you being a high school student, and I grew up in a competitive household. I grew up with two brothers. My father's a very competitive person, and I always grew up on in the AAU circuit. But when you get to college, it's a different dynamic because you're fighting for time on the field, and it's just just a completely different atmosphere in terms of just being a competitive place where you're just constantly fighting for your spot.
Was that the same for you, Red Paul?
Actually, it's kind of the opposite. I went to high school at a very, very big swimming school. We never lost a dual meet in 4 years. We had 2 state championships. And then I went to this college where the swimming program was really mediocre. And it was so great.
Yeah.
Because I have to say, for me, it was really what I was looking for. I didn't want to go to a place where I was going to have to spend 6 hours in the pool. And really, that was going to be my life for my whole experience. But I wanted to be involved with swimming because I had been since I was 6.
It sounds like you switched plots.
We had completely different experiences, but I think that's also the program you go into.
Definitely.
So, my program never made any pretenses of being this intense program that you're going to have to give your life to. Mm-hmm. It was meant to be fun, and we treated it like that.
Well, that's awesome. Kimberly, do you think that students who are athletes know what they're getting themselves into, especially hearing how different their stories were?
Not always, but college students don't really know what they're getting into when they hit campus. And in some ways, I think being a student athlete really helped because you go to practice, you get a little feel of the campus before other students might. And you also are stepping into a program where the expectations are very high and they're set out immediately. You have to be at practices on time. You know what kinds of rules and behaviors are expected of you. And having some of that kind of boundary in place does help you form some other good habits that are going to be useful for the non-sports part of your college life.
Yeah, it sounds like you're getting second lessons and like the same that you would get at home from your parents. Is that true, guys? Because it sounds like you're getting big lessons.
Absolutely.
What were the big lessons that you all learned?
For me, it was more so being resilient, being in a place where I can. You don't have your parents around, so you're now at a program where your coach is now the authoritative figure. And if you like him or not, you have to be able to respond to him and work with him in a professional setting to necessarily kind of you have to deal with him. You have to make sure that that he's on your side because he holds, your cards in his hand in terms of your playing time, in terms of who can actually play, who can't play. So I think in terms of what it taught me how to deal with people. It taught me how to deal with people who I may not necessarily like, and also taught me to be resilient, not really feel sorry for myself as well.
See, that was my challenge when I was in high school, why I didn't go to college and play any sports, and why I quit in high school, because immediately I hated my coach. He cussed at me one time, and I was like, I will cuss you out. I don't give a damn. And that, screwed up everything. So, Rev Paul, was there a challenge that you had that is similar to what the college kids have or any sports athletes have?
Well, I think that if you're going to be involved with a sport where you have, a coach that's going to, lay the parameters, that's part of the bargain. So you have to, but that's also part of the coaching problem. I mean, a good coach knows how to push students without, abusing students. And I think that that's a real thing on college campuses. Coaches should remember, and we're talking about, not talking about football programs at major, where they're money-making propositions. So I can't really speak to that. Coaches at normal programs should realize that their mission is part of the university mission, which is primarily about education and forming good citizens. Yeah. And so that's really important. That's also part of what's advantageous about being a student athlete, is that you realize that you're part of a community that has a common purpose and is there to support one another. So it's really about how do you form good communities?
Well, you said it brought up another good point with the community, but also about that the primary purpose should be education. Right. And I remember when I was in school, I noticed that a lot of the college athletes got passes sometimes. And Kimberly, I remember reading that you had some type of experience with that. Could you share your views on sort of if college athletes got away with murder in a sense when it came to doing schoolwork?
I think it definitely depends on the school and on the program. There are some sports, marquee sports like football and basketball, in some programs, those students are going to get a lot of help when it comes to tutoring, when it comes to having some flexibility from their professors. And some professors won't bend to that. I know in my experience, my teammates on the women's soccer team and on the reserve team, they were pursuing tough majors. They were pursuing business and education and nursing because none of them were expecting to go pro, and so they knew that their studies had, that's what they really were there for, even if they were a scholarship athlete. But there were, I heard stories of basketball players. Valpo had a really strong basketball program where there was some engineering student who was, doing the homework for these, for these guys, and people that were, giving kind of an inordinate amount of assistance when it comes to prepping for a test and things like that. So that really speaks more to kind of the culture of how prized certain sports are at a school. So I think there are definitely some differences, not universal. I don't know about Reverend Paul's experience, but I know that our swim team probably didn't get any breaks in that area.
Well, Kimberly, you made a good point about the fact that since your female teammates knew that they couldn't go pro because that's not available to them, they focused on their schoolwork.
Right.
So is that true to say that men or male college athletes don't focus on the degree so much because the fact that they want to go pro?
I think, just to kind of back up a little bit,
Yeah.
I think that once, for instance, when I stepped on the campus, I went to a mid-major university, so necessarily wasn't your big Division I school, like a LSU or a Duke, or although Duke's a great school, or University of Kentucky. It wasn't one of those schools. But once you step on the campus, it's not necessarily, some of the athletes even get programmed into thinking, saying like, hey, I want to be an engineer, or I want to go into journalism, or I want to go into something like this. And then the academic advisor is so set up in the system of like, you may not have enough time for that. So why don't we just put you in these health and rec classes, which will be credit towards your graduation, and then you can go from there. So I think it's more so the system itself of college athletics, and not saying all schools, but from my personal experience, that sort of sets these kids up in a place where it's like saying we'll make sure you graduate, and you'll have that letter of graduation, you'll have that your bachelor's degree in your hand, but your degree will necessarily not be in something that may behoove your future interests.
That's crazy to think that an administrator would be telling a student, oh, I know you have this dream, but no, you don't have to go after that. Go after the sports side. It's sort of as if they're in it for the best interest of the money and the sport
and what can keep the athlete on the field.
Wow. Did you have the same experience?
I had none of those experiences. Again, I went to a small school where athletics...
Or did you witness it at least?
No, not I went to McAllister College, which is mostly about it's a nerd school. It's about academics, activism, a lot of freaks. So for me, I didn't have any pressure of that kind. I have gone to schools where I worked at Princeton University where athletics were taken incredibly seriously. That said, it was never to the expense of academics because, again, these students were all very bright and they did well in school because their coaches insisted that they do well in school. So I think it's a coaching question. It's also an administration question.
Well,
what do you value? What ultimately? And I actually feel for the students at places like LSU and at places, big schools with big football programs, because there is pressure to win. And what are you going to give up? And not all of those guys are going to go pro.